This presentation is about the genesis of the American Haiku Archives, how it came to be, some of its history, with photographs, how to visit the website, and also photos and poems from all of the honorary curators over the years. And the main message from this presentation is that it's important to realize that this is your haiku archives, and it is something that belongs to everyone who writes haiku and appreciates this sort of poetry. So that's the message I want to convey today. The picture here shows Jerry Kilbride, who's chiefly responsible for the existence of the archives. And those blue folders you see there, every single one is a handmade, acid-free folder for books in the haiku archives. Everything you can see there is part of the haiku archives. There's much more that you can't see. And there's much more that they haven't even had a chance to catalog yet. Boxes and boxes of materials. There's a lot to go through. The presentation today is about the archives. It's the world's largest public collection of haiku books and papers outside Japan, and it is dedicated to preserving North American haiku together with the correspondence, papers, and books of all of its practitioners. It's meant to be as inclusive as possible. The archives was inaugurated at the California State Library in Sacramento on July 12, 1996, so just over 24 years ago. So this is the actual building where the collection is housed. There's actually a really fancy old building where that's the official home for the California State Library. But this is next door to it is this building, which is a state-of-the-art modern building. And we'll see more pictures of this. The vaults, which are actually in the basement, are where the actual haiku materials are stored. So our presentation today covers the archive formation, the inauguration, a mission statement, how to visit the archives, the archival process, which is amazing to me how much work they put into the simplest things that are archived there, the website, honorary curators, and how you can help. And we hope you can help. And we'll have time for questions at the end. So, some history. The Haiku Society of America sought a suitable home for its growing collection of books and papers for many years. And I was on a committee, I think, in the early, mid-90s that was trying to explore various options for its collection. In 1994, Dr. Kevin Starr was appointed by Governor Pete Wilson to be California State Librarian. This is a key event in making this, even today's event, happen. Dr. Starr had developed a fondness for haiku thanks to his friendship with Jerry Kilbride, a widely published haiku poet. And an aside here about Jerry Kilbride and how this happened is Jerry was head bartender for the Olympic Club, which is a prestigious private athletic club in downtown San Francisco. And I think you need like $150,000 for the initiation fee, if that gives you any idea. And I was visiting him there once, and he introduced me to Joe DiMaggio. That's the kind of clientele it had. And that's how Jerry Kilbride and Dr. Starr got to know each other. And naturally, Jerry shared his love and enjoyment of haiku poetry. So Dr. Starr developed this appreciation for haiku. And when Jerry mentioned to Dr. Starr that the Haiku Society was looking for a home for its archives, and he said, well, why not the California State Library? So that's how the ball got rolling. So Jerry initially shared the idea with Gary Gay and me, and we formed a small initial committee to establish the archives. And Jerry secured a commitment from Elizabeth Searle Lamb, who's a longtime editor of Frog Pond for the Haiku Society, to donate her haiku library and extensive papers to serve as a cornerstone for the archive. That's really the beginning of the collection right there. Michael and Gary began evangelizing for the archives in 1995 at the Haiku Society's Haiku Chicago conference, seeking to secure the donation of the HSA materials as a second cornerstone for the archives. And I remember printing out a orange, I'm sorry, I guess it was gold, yellow handout that said "Striking Gold," which is how I felt about the value of having the California State Library support the collection. And as a result of that, it came about. Joining Jerry, Michael, and Gary on the committee were George Olzak, who at that time was working on trying to develop a documentary movie about haiku, Tom Clausen, who's a librarian at Cornell, C. Rosenau. And I should pause here to mention that when I was going through the list of advisory board members, I forgot to mention C. Rosenau. She is also on our advisory board. My apologies, 6C, for missing that. Also on our committee was George Swede, representing Canada, and Elizabeth Lamb, because she was making a major donation. So that was the initial committee. And in early 1996, HSA President Barbara Ressler, Treasurer Raphael de Grutela, and other HSA officers voted unanimously to commit all HSA books, records, and other materials to the archives as the HSA's official permanent collection. The committee worked with Dr. Starr and Curator of Special Collections Gary Kurtz to start receiving and processing books and papers at the library. And they did a remarkable job of materials just in that first 6 months of 1996, just begin processing materials, mostly from Elizabeth Lamb, starting from the HSA as well. So I proposed the idea that we ought to have a ritual or celebration or something. And so we had the idea to have an inauguration for the archives at the library. And I worked with Dr. Starr and other committee members to organize the event. And so about 70 people attended the inauguration celebration on July 12, 1996, hosted by Dr. Starr. And he knows how to throw a good literary party. Hiroshi Furusawa, Director and Consul of the Consulate General of Japan, Tom Wilkins, who is Executive Director, and Kathleen Kimura, President of the Japan Society of Northern California, and Barbara Ressler, who was President of the Haiku Society of America. And we have pictures coming up. Honored guests read letters of commendation, and a congratulatory letter from Robert Hass, Poet Laureate of the United States, was read in his absence. Gary Kurtz talked about how to use the archives, demonstrated the archival process using early donated materials, and led a tour of the facility after a luncheon catered by the Office of the State Librarian. And yes, we have a picture or two. Readings of haiku were given by K. F. Anderson, D. Evitz, Elizabeth Searle Lamb, Gary Gay, Lee Gurga, James W. Hackett, Margaret Malarski, Barbara Ressler, and Kyoko Tokutomi, and I served as the MC and also read. That was a marvelous reading. Again, we have at least one picture of that. At the inauguration, Dr. Starr named Elizabeth Searle Lamb as the first honorary curator of the American Haiku Archives. The inauguration event also featured the reading of the American Haiku Archives mission statement, and I'd like to share that with you. Based on the belief that haiku and related poetry can enrich lives, the American Haiku Archives is dedicated to the collection, preservation, and promotion of this poetry as a vital component of literature in the English language. Established July 12, 1996 as an inclusive educational and scholarly resource at the California State Library in Sacramento, the Archives seeks to make its materials accessible to the general public, especially students, poets, writers, and scholars. The Archives material, primarily in English, meaning not just in English, includes books, magazines, pamphlets, recordings, artworks, photographs, letters, papers, and ephemera. It also encompasses other historical and contemporary materials, individuals, groups, publishers, societies around the world from whom the archives actively invites future and regular contributions. So if you're a publisher of haiku books, if you're a publisher of a haiku-related journal, make sure the Haiku Archives is on your mailing list to receive a copy so it can be permanently archived there. The American Haiku Archives exists with the hope and confidence that present and future generations will continue to enjoy and benefit from the reading, writing, and studying of haiku and all related poetry. And of course, it's in this context that, of course, Lenard fits this bill. He himself is dedicated to the sharing and appreciation of haiku poetry. So here are some inauguration photos. And these photos are by Patricia Hackett, the wife of James W. Hackett. And this is inside the lobby of that first building I showed you the picture of. And this is Gary Kurtz here. And on the wall here is a quote from a poem by Ina Coolbrith, who I believe was the very first California poet laureate 100 and some years ago. For California is a poem, the land of romance, of mystery, of worship, of beauty, and of song. And the fact that poetry is given such a prominent place, even in the lobby of the building, is a good sign for the way they appreciate haiku as part of that. Some other people in this picture, I believe this is Laura Bell Habecker, some of you may know. And I believe this is Jennifer Deming, who is the daughter of Kristen Deming, who was president of the Haiku Society of America around that time. So this photo was taken in the room where we had the reading. This is before everyone had gathered, but there's a lot of people you may know. This is Eugenie Waldteufel, Laura Bell Habecker, Neil Waldteufel, Gary Kurtz is over here, Jocelyn Conway, Lee Gurga, John Thompson, Paul Watsky, not even remembering everybody, George Olzak, Elizabeth Lamb, Gary Gay and his wife, Kimberly Kortner, Kea Anderson and her husband, and there were a lot more people who came later. But at least we have this picture. I wish we had more. And this is the reading itself. That's James Hackett at the lectern, with me on the left. And Margaret Malarski, I think this is Kay Anderson, partially hidden here, Lee Gurga, Barbara Ressler, Elizabeth Lamb, and Dee Evans. And this is inside Dr. Starr's office. This is Dr. Starr. We had our catered lunch in the background there. And we filled the space with, he had tables just filling up his office. Lovely office, beautiful wood and books all around. Such an enthusiastic supporter of the archives. We're very fortunate to have had his leadership in making this happen. And some of you may know he passed away a few years ago. So, visiting the archives. This map here shows Capitol Park in Sacramento, and the California Capitol building is in the middle of this. And at one corner is that building you saw earlier. So that's the location of this, and I'll have more pictures of this. So the following pictures are by Gary Gay and show former HSA treasurer Paul Miller and former Haiku Poets of Northern California president David Grayson as they visit the American Haiku Archives. So here's the state capitol building. And so it's sort of in the shadow of this building that our archives exists. And to me, that's very exciting. So here's Paul Miller walking from one corner of the building. And if you turn around from where this picture was taken, you see this, which is where the Haiku Archives are. And enter the building. And then on special occasions, when you're allowed to visit the vault, where all the archives materials are housed, this is where it is. And it's climate controlled and has fire suppression, state-of-the-art preservation methods. If I'm not mistaken, I think they can flood the entire room with argon so that no fire is possible, or something like that. I'm not sure. So this is David Grayson and Paul Miller examining one of the acid-free boxes containing personal letters in the archives. And these are some of the stacks. every blue folder represents a haiku book in the collection. It's a remarkable collection here. And there's more that's out of the picture to the right. Here's David looking through the collection. All books are arranged alphabetically. And when I've been down there, it drives me nuts because I want to look at every single book. And the blue folders don't tell you what some of the books are. You have to pull them out and look at it, or you have to know by the call number what it is. But there are quite a few books that don't need the archival folders, and I recognize many old friends among the haiku books there. So this is Gary Kurtz, who was, at the time, was curator of special collections at the California State Library and was chief caretaker of the Haiku Archives. And this is that climate-controlled place where the archives are. So you can see the blue folders in the background. And this here are collections of haiku magazines. And these are some of the folders holding correspondence and other ephemera and photographs or other things submitted by donors. Remember, this picture was taken 20 years ago. There's much more material there now than is shown in these pictures. The archives, when there isn't an open house that lets you tour down into the stacks, the normal process is that you search through the catalog listing and request the material to be brought to you. It could be a box of letters, say, Jane Reichold's letters, for example. She has many hundreds of them. You could request a box and it's brought to you, or a book, particular book or set of books, and you can research them in this special rare book collection room where pens are not allowed, but you can bring in a laptop and a pencil. They're very careful about how our materials are preserved. I'm grateful for that. These are photos that Stan Forrester took when there was a National Haiku Society of America meeting there some while ago. And this is the floor of that lobby area. And even there, letters are part of the value of the archives. And you can see below some of the material, some of the equipment they use in the archival process. We have some pictures of that as well. So the staff of the library is constantly working to process haiku materials, and we wish it were more constantly, but we're grateful for whatever they can do, and of course, grateful too for Patricia Mockmiller and her team for the work that she does on a regular basis to catalog all the materials and to put them in archival form. So each item goes through an archival process, including the creation of the special folders, hold many of the items, and all materials are painstakingly cataloged so that you can find them through the California State Library website. And you search for if you search for American Haiku Archives on that website, you can see a tremendous number of materials there. And they still have boxes of stuff to go through, so there's a lot still coming. So the following photos by Gary Gay show some of the archival steps. This is Gerald Lee, and I'm forgetting her last name, but this is the table where they create some of the folders. And so she's taping these folders together, and an envelope is taped into it, and then the material is put inside the envelope, kept flat by the special cardboard holders. And every single one of these is handmade and sometimes cut to size for particular book sizes. So it's an incredible amount of work that they do to preserve our materials. Lots of dangerous tools to use and presses. And sometimes, these things are taped or glued or however they're done, and then they have to be put aside to wait for them to dry, and they come back to them to finish them later. This is an example folder. Here, the blue tape, it's a kind of tape, holds everything together. And, the corners are rounded. The envelope is acid-free. It's got a barcode on it. And this special container here, in this case, is holding a very thin chapbook by George Swede, My Shadow Doing Something. This is like a 32-page chapbook. It's very small. And it's given this special treatment. And multiply this by thousands, and this is what the archive is for us. So I forget what this story was here, but she was explaining some of the process, I recall. And this is another one of the library workers. He's actually ripping a page out of a phone book. I don't know quite what for. Maybe to do some pasting or sewing of something. I don't remember the story here. This is Karen Smith, I think is her name. Remember, these pictures are 20 years old, and I love that old computer. But she was one of the chief people helping with the cataloging materials. Jerry Kilbride also helped. As Tricia mentioned, he volunteered for years after he retired with processing materials. And he not only worked on the haiku content, but also on World War II and especially Korean War content, as well as his own contributions to the archives. And he did a tremendous amount of work to get that going, and to also establish a tradition of having volunteers to help, as Patricia mentioned. So your haiku materials could be here too. So something I remember Dr. Kevin Starr saying is that if in doubt, donate. In other words, if you're not sure if it's worth preserving, donate it and let history decide. That's what he said to us. Now, obviously, if it's a book that we already have in the collection, you could perhaps give it to somebody else or sell it. And you can check by doing a search on the archives on the California State Library website. But other than that, you know, if you have correspondence with haiku poets that might be of interest, please do consider donating that, or perhaps rare books or other materials. Just this week, I got an email from an old-time haiku poet named Joyce Currier. She told me she had dozens of letters from Jerry Kilbride, and did I want them? I said, "Oh yes, definitely," and I'll make sure they're sent to the Haiku Archives. And so, just yesterday, I sent her my address, and I look forward to seeing those. And that's the kind of decision that it takes, because those letters would be lost. And she's in an assisted living place right now, and it's very easy to just toss those aside, and, put them in the recycling bin. But she's chosen to send them, and I'll get to look at them and think about. You know, I will definitely send them all on to the Haiku Archives, but it'll be a pleasure to look at them first. So I'm grateful for her doing that. So some additional photos. I don't even remember what this occasion was. Gary, do you remember? You can unmute and perhaps chime in here. But I know on the left here is Rich Krifcher. This is Ty Hadman, who lived in Peru for many years, but was a Bay Area person. Pamela Miller-Ness. Yvonne Caballona is in here, Jerry Kilbride, and there's Gary Gay. This is on one of the visits to the archives. And that's Ty Hadman down on the stacks. Here he is again. I know that book looks familiar, but I can't remember what it is. Looking through the stacks. It's Rich Krifcher. Pamela Miller-Ness. I see some old friends here. I have most of these books here. Translation of the Manyoshu from Japanese down here. And there's Jerry Kilbride. And really, the archives would not exist if it weren't for Jerry and his friendship with Dr. Kevin Starr. And they knew each other long before Dr. Starr became state librarian. Dr. Starr wrote half a dozen, I think it's about that, definitive books on the history of the state of California. They are the go-to books about California history. So he was perfectly suited to be California State Librarian. And thank goodness for his connection with Jerry Kilbride that made it possible for the Haiku Archives to exist at the California State Library. So we have a website. This particular screenshot was back when John Stevenson was our honorary curator a couple of years ago. There's a lot of material to see there at the website. And one thing I'll point out is this little picture down here is what the original building, the old part of the library, that's the building it's housed in, a very old classical style building. And we're fortunate to be in the new state-of-the-art building. There's lots of lots of wonderful books in the old building as well. So the website has the mission statement, a list of honorary curators, guide to research. Randy Brooks did a tremendous amount of work showing sample searches and other things about information about how to do research. And there's also event listings and visitor comments. You can find information for how to donate, including a downloadable donation form instructions, and contact information, as I mentioned earlier, for each of the advisory board members, including bios and photos of the board members. And if you have any question about the archives beyond today, feel free to contact any board member, and we'll do our best to answer that. And on the Facebook page, too, we also have occasionally people will ask research questions there. And although it doesn't necessarily help us actually look in the archives to find the answer, somebody listening or watching or reading will know the answer. And that's another way to get at least basic research done, is by posing your questions there. We also have answers to questions on the website that you can check out. Plus links to, high-level links to various haiku organizations, other haiku collections, and archives. So, as I mentioned, every year we appoint an honorary curator that to recognize that person's exemplary service to haiku, whether through original poetry, translations, criticism, inspirational or organizational leadership. So it can take various forms. And as you'll see in what follows, some of the people were chosen perhaps for being scholars of haiku, or translators, or accomplished poets. So we can now, I'm now going to share poems and photos by each of the honorary curators since 1996. Our very first honorary curator was Elizabeth Searle Lamb, and she had the privilege of being our honorary curator for 2 years while we figured out, oh, we should make this an annual thing. So she got a little bit of extra time. And her poem, "The year turns on the harp's gold leaf, summer dust." And it's worth knowing that in addition to being longtime editor of the Frog Pond Journal for the Haiku Society of America, she was also a professional harpist. Jerry Kilbride was our next curator. Fog, just the tree and I at the bus stop. And the photograph is from his Korean War days. Cor Vanden summer afternoon. Long fly ball to center field takes its time. We have a few more pictures of Cor here and some of his books. I love the picture of him with a baseball. And of course, he did the baseball haiku anthology from Norton. And if you haven't seen it, his book, A Boy's Seasons, is a wonderful hybrid collection of sports throughout all the seasons. He was really into all sorts of sports, not just baseball. And the hybrid in this collection, well worth reading, among other books. Robert Speece was our next honorary curator. The Field's Evening Fog. Quietly, the hound comes to fetch me home. And as you know, he was longtime editor of Modern Haiku magazine. Lorraine Ellis Haar, Portland, Oregon. Midwinter gloom. She turns on the lights in her doll's house. She edited Dragonfly magazine for many years, and also ran the Western World Haiku Society. And I had the privilege of visiting her house in Portland some years ago, maybe 18 or so years ago. Well, it would have been before she died. I'm guessing at least 19 or 20 years ago. And I remember sitting at her kitchen table, and she said, "Right here, this table is where every single issue of Dragonfly was folded and stapled." And it somehow felt special to be sitting there and to know all the personal hard work that went into every issue that she made there. I think that's true of a lot of haiku poets, that they work tirelessly, editors and others, they work tirelessly to celebrate and share haiku poetry. Leroy Canterman He was co-founder of the Haiku Society of America in 1968 with Harold G. Henderson. Sunset. The scarecrow stretches across the field. William J. Higginson. Spring rain. Rereading my own book, I fall asleep. I loved how he could poke fun at himself there. Of course, we know him for the Haiku Handbook, which to me is still the best book for learning about haiku poetry. Of course, his Haiku Seasons, Haiku World books are valuable books for understanding the role of seasonal reference in traditional haiku. And if you're not familiar with this book, Wind in the Long Grass, it's a hardback or paperback children's book that it's for adults as much as it is for children. And it's a wonderful collection of poetry from around the world with seasonal awareness. Makoto Ueda, our next curator. He was chair of the Asian Studies Department at Stanford University for many years and a translator of numerous books relating to haiku. This is his translation of Basho. On a bare branch, a crow has alighted, autumn nightfall. And something that's really interesting, I had the privilege to sit in his office a few times at Stanford University. And he told me at the time he subscribed to Woodnotes and Frog Pond and a few other American haiku magazines. And he said one of the reasons he did that was because he wanted to see what contemporary haiku poets in English were doing. And one of the influences of that, and he told me this specifically, was that his translations, at least his later ones, started with a lowercase letter and did not have periods at the end, because that was the fashion of most American haiku poets. And there's a reason for that. Not all translators do that, but he deliberately followed that pattern because of the influence of magazines like Woodnotes and Frog Pond and Modern Haiku that I know he subscribed to. So that kind of awareness I thought was very, very influential. These are some of his books. If you don't have them, you should rush out and get them. This one, A Modern Japanese Haiku, an anthology, is all about Gendai haiku, and he published this in 1976. So it's taken us a long time to catch up. And George Swede cites this book as being the reason he got interested in haiku. Of course, he was co-founder of Haiku Canada. So the ripples spread, and we're pleased to honor all the people that helped spread these ripples. Francine Porad was our next honorary curator, and she's from where I currently live near Seattle. She was also an artist, and she edited Brussels Sprouts for many years, and was also Haiku Society of America president. This is my favorite poem by her. Snapped line, salmon's full length in the air. Her husband was a fisherman, so she wrote a lot of fisherman poems. And one of them, I think, was about her husband holding the fish closer to the camera so it looked bigger. Hiroaki Sato is our next curator. This is his translation of Basho. An old pond, frog jumps in, sound of water. And Hiroaki Sato is known for many, many books and many honors. He's from the Country of Eight Islands book, won the Penn Translation Prize, and his most recent book is a collection of essays on haiku that I highly recommend. Many other books, translations of haiku and other Japanese poetry and other things that aren't necessarily poetry. He's been a tremendous benefit to anyone interested in haiku. H.F. Noyes, who for many years lived in Greece, was our next curator. Raking aside leaves on the backyard pond, I release the moon. And a little bit of a tidbit here is some of you may know the composer John Cage, who's famous for 4 minutes and 33 seconds of silence. And he was also influenced by haiku and wrote poem compositions called haiku and renga and related things. Well, apparently, John Cage learned about R.H. Blythe because H.F. Noyes gave him Blythe's books. I don't know if you know that, but apparently that's the case. So again, the ripples are spreading. George Swede was our next honorary curator. Passport check. My shadow waits across the border. And some more pictures of George. I should come up with pictures of his books instead because he has dozens, but I have these pictures of him instead, including one with Basho in the corner. Stephen Addis, he too has written numerous books and translations of great benefit to the haiku community. Old pond paved over into a parking lot. One frog still singing. I can't help but think of Joni Mitchell, paved paradise, and put up a parking lot. He was also a fine artist himself and also a musician. And he toured in a folk group back in the day. And if you look hard, you can find recordings of his folk music. Some of his many books, The Art of Haiku, is a tremendous book, and the series of books here, this is just some of them, of haiku translations that I highly recommend. And his writing about haiga is the definitive writing about haiga and related art. Gary Snyder, hammering a dent out of a bucket. A woodpecker answers from the woods. Snyder, of course, was influential for introducing Kerouac and Ginsberg to haiku and giving them R.H. Blythe's books. And through them, although Snyder himself did not write a whole lot of haiku, I think he was extremely influential for popularizing haiku and making people aware of it, especially through other beat poets, Lew Welch and Philip Whalen and others, all exploring haiku because of his influence. Again, thank you to Gary. Jerry Ball, Journey to the North, the last radio station beginning to fade. Jerry co-founded the Haiku North America Conference and also the Haiku Pacific Rim Conference. He started the Southern California Haiku Study Group. He was a longtime officer of the Yuki Society, and I think it was Jerry's idea to start the Asilomar Haiku Conference. That used to be haiku retreat, I should say. It used to be the only annual haiku retreat in the country for years. And now, of course, there are quite a few more. I think we all owe Jerry a thank you for that. Leroy Gorman, Unsold at Dusk, Morning Picked Corn's Deeper Yellow. And here's a bit of trivia for you. Leroy Gorman has published his poetry under at least 50 pseudonyms. So there's a lot more poetry by him out there than you may realize. And sometimes in the same journal, there'll be multiple poems by him, but with pseudonyms. And I think someone somewhere, maybe Charlie Trumbull, has cataloged some of these. And he's not trying to hide it. It's just he just has fun with it, especially with some of his visual poetry. Of course, he was a longtime officer of Haiku Canada and very influential in Haiku Canada's history. Speaking of Charles Trumbull, late to the office, my desk already piled high. Zucchini. Charlie was editor of Modern Haiku for a number of years and has been basically a chief historian for haiku in the last 20, 30 years. Great debt to him, and he's lately started the Haikupedia project on the Haiku Foundation website. Marlene Mountain, Pig and I, Spring Rain. She's one of the few haiku poets on this list that I've never met, but we corresponded, and I think a lot of people did. And she was a marvelous influence on many people. And I know myself, I wrote 575 haiku with titles for 12 years. And then I read the second edition of Cor Vandenheuvel's Haiku Anthology. That's where I first read Lenard's poems. That would have been around 1988, I think it was, when I read it. And what really changed my perspective of haiku was Marlene's poetry, more than anyone else, because it was not syllable, just mere syllable counting. She used visual means. She had images. There's so much else that she did with haiku that it told me, it announced to me that haiku is not what you think it is, and it can be something larger. And of course, most of the poems in the book are not 575, so that was part of my shift personally from thinking about haiku as form, thinking about a poem where content mattered more than form. The content followed after, the form followed after the content. And I particularly personally thank Marlene Mountain for pushing me in that direction, whether she liked it or not. Ruth Yarrow, River Edge Old Growth, a towering window of stars. She was an environmentalist and also an activist, and she has many essays on various social awareness topics that I highly recommend. Haruo Shirane, translator. Basho, on a bare branch a crow has alighted, autumn evening. And these are just some of his many, many books that I highly recommend, especially Traces of Dreams about the poetry of Basho, but also other books relating to Japanese culture. Seasons as well. This one here, Japan and the Culture of Four Seasons. It's a wonderful book that gives a larger picture of the role of seasons, not just in haiku, but in the entire culture. Trisha Donegan, Last Night Lightning, This Morning White Iris. And she too did many books that are highly influential. And Chio Ni is perhaps the one that people love the most. It's the hardest to find, and I wish it were back in print. Her Haiku Mind and Love Haiku books are also great. She also has some of her own books of her own haiku as well. And these two books on the right are both for children. Write Your Own Haiku is actually the same content as this earlier one. It's just given a new title. But either one, get either one. It's recommended for adults as well as children. John Stevenson is our next honorary curator. Writers' Conference. From a toilet stall, I hear someone quoting me, which is a wonderful poem. And, perhaps a few of us have heard ourselves being quoted, but probably not like this. John has a wonderful set of books, and these are just a few of them, including the editing of the Heron's Nest anthology, Nest Feathers, plus his involvement with the Upstate Dim Sum Group, and many of his own books. Alexis Rotella was our most recent honorary curator. At the top of the Ferris wheel, Lilac Scent. And this is a poem that I use in the handouts I use for haiku workshops I give, among many other poems. And I just love the moment she records here. And these are some of her many, many books. She has many more. Most recently, well, among the most recent ones is this Me Too anthology, and many of her own books, highly worth searching out. And I know when I first got into haiku and connected with the Haiku Society of America, some of her early books were very influential for me personally. And of course, now we have Lenard D. Moore. Hot afternoon, squeak of my hands on my daughter's coffin.
Wow, well read, Michael.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And these are some of Lenard's many books. I heartily recommend searching these out. If you go to the American Haiku Archives.org website, there's a page for Lenard with biographical information, sample poems, list of books, and most of the list there to the anthologies and his own books link to places where you can find more information or purchase the books. There's also a long list of videos or audio and essays about Lenard and his work. So please do check that out. Learn a lot more about Lenard there. So just to end here, how you can help. Please consider saving and donating all your haiku books and haiku-related correspondence, photos, and other materials. And then you can visit the How to Donate page on the American Haiku Archives website, where you can download forms to help make your donations. And if you have any questions, you can contact board members, especially me, and we can help you with any questions you might have about making donations. And as I mentioned earlier, if in doubt about the value of your materials, just donate them and let history decide. Because if you don't donate them, they could be lost to history, and that would be great shame. And I think of those letters I just mentioned from Joyce Courier. We're about to get those, through me at least. And I'm glad that those letters from Jerry Kilbride, all about haiku, she's told me, won't be lost to history. So if you have any questions, please contact any of the board members. And again, my apologies to C. Rose now for not mentioning her earlier. We were going through the reading by board members. And you can also contact whoever the current HSA president, currently Jay Friedenberg, have questions about the HSA's involvement with the archives or any other questions you might have. And again, contact information is available through the Contact Us page on the Haiku Archives website. So to conclude, Haiku's future. The Haiku Society of America co-founder Harold G. Henderson is often quoted as saying that haiku in English will become what the poets make of it. The American Haiku Archives is a significant part of what North American haiku poets have made of haiku. All haiku poets, not just members of the Haiku Society of America, can be particularly proud of the American Haiku Archives and how it signals the maturity and accomplishment of haiku poetry written in English. So it's up to us. Where will we take haiku next? And I know Lenard Moore is one of those poets on the vanguard of taking haiku to new and wonderful places. And earlier today, he was telling me he has quite a few unpublished manuscripts of various kinds, and that alone will be the start of where he personally can take haiku to a new place in the future. And I'm sure that many of the rest of us will also be participating in that process of taking haiku to new and wonderful and undiscovered places. So thank you all. And of course, thank you to Jerry Kilbride, without whom the American Haiku Archives would not have existed. So, thank you all for staying with us here. We have a few minutes for comments or questions. If you have a question, just to make sure, I meant to mention this earlier, if you showed the participants list and you click the yes button that you should see, please do that, and I'll know to acknowledge you to share a question. If you have any questions and more about for Lenard, or about the Haiku Archives or the materials or anything you can think of relating to the Haiku Archives, please click yes or speak up if you unmute yourself.
This is Carmen Sturba. I have two things to say. Most of all, Leonard, I'm very happy to see your face again. And we worked together at HSA, yeah, together, and you were always a gentleman.
Oh, thank you, Carmen. Good to hear your voice. I don't see you though, but I hear you.
Yeah, and Michael, you'll be very surprised, but the first time I went to California State Library and Haiku Archives was on 9/11. Yes. Yeah. And I was with my niece, and we were on the way, and we found out what was happening, and we got there, and I got in the library, and nobody in the library knew what had happened. And I found Jerry, and pretty soon everyone listened to the, TV or whatever, and they knew what happened. And Jerry Hybrid took me over to his house, and we spent quite a while, trying to figure out what was going on.
So you were stuck in Sacramento, I'm sure, because you couldn't
Well,
fly.
I went there for with my niece. We were just going to go, and one of the things I wanted to do, she lives in Sacramento, and so I wanted to go to the Haiku Archives, and so that was my plan.
So perhaps others of us have stories about the archives, but I don't think anybody else on September 11 have that kind of story. It must have been kind of traumatic that day. I imagine if the library was shut, government buildings, I'm sure, were all shut down pretty quickly.
Yeah, and actually I was living in Japan at that time, and so I was stuck in America for a week. Yeah.
Yes, so a unique experience. Probably not what you bargained for.
Right.
But I can think of worse places to be stuck than Sacramento. Any other comments or questions? Stories? Reminiscences? Any roasting of Lenard?
Well, just let me speak up and say I want to thank him and Dave and Bob Moyer, because they helped us do 2 Haiku North Americas in North Carolina, and it was really great.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you, Gary. Good to see you.
Richard.
Other comments? Well, this may be a good point to end on. Again, thank you, Lenard, for your inspiration and sharing of your poetry and your enthusiasm for haiku. As you may know, the appointment of being honorary curator gives you no responsibilities whatsoever. Don't have to do anything.
Keep writing haiku.
Oh, well, that's a choice. Okay. We hereby require you to keep writing haiku then.
All right, thanks.
So there are no responsibilities in this office, but we hope it gives you some satisfaction and reward, and we're very happy to add you to our pantheon of honorary curators. And thanks to the rest of you for participating today. Very glad that we could do this, and a couple of you have asked if this will be an annual thing, and I am certain it will be. And so we can thank the pandemic and everybody's comfort with Zoom in the last few months. If we hadn't had a pandemic, I don't think we'd thought of doing this. So we can thank the pandemic for enabling our having of this special Zoom event. And yes, we will plan to have it annually. And maybe there's some other events we can have during the rest of the year via Zoom as well, even after the pandemic is well over, which I hope will be soon. So again, thank you for everyone's support of this. Thank you also to all the American Haiku Archives Advisory Board members for helping to keep the ship afloat. And of course, thank you to the California State Library for housing all our haiku materials. So let's give one more round of virtual applause for Lenard Moore as our honorary curator. Thank you, Lenard.
Wow, thank you.